My name is Lucan. I have looked into the face of a god every day for 30 years. They told us the sun was a giver of life, a beacon of order in a chaotic universe. They were wrong. Up here on the edge of the void, the sun is just a furnace that never stops screaming. I thought I was simply doing a job. I thought I was saving my sister. I thought the numbers on my screen were the only truth that mattered. But I was blind. We all were. Today I am going to tell you how the light died. I will tell you about the Helios Omega Station, about the things that whispered in the static, and about the price of a soul in a galaxy that has forgotten mercy. But I warn you, you must listen to this recording until the very last second. Do not stop. Do not look away. Because the final twist of my story, the truth about what I became and what I brought back with me, is a revelation so horrifying, so undeniably necessary, that it will change how you look at the stars forever. The answer is heavier than any chain. The story begins now. Before we descend into the black, leave a mark, like a subscription, so I know I am not speaking to the void alone. It gets cold in here. Chapter 1. The blind spot. The floor was cold. That is the first thing I remember, not the death of my father or the fall of the city, but the specific biting chill of the deck plating on Helios Omega. It seeped through the soles of my standard-issue boots. It worked its way into the bones of my ankles and climbed up my shins. It was the only honest thing on this station. Everything else was a lie, wrapped in plasteel and prayer seals. I sat in the primary observation blister, my face bathed in the sickly amber glow of the cogitator screens. Outside the reinforced armaglass, the sun was raging. It was a chaotic storm of fusion and fire, a ball of violence so immense that it defied the human mind's ability to comprehend scale. I took a sip of recycled water. It tasted like copper and old sweat. That was the flavor of survival. My official title was Spectral Monitoring Technician Grade 4. It sounds important. It wasn't. It meant I was a glorified window washer for the station's sensors. My job was to watch the solar output log the magnetic flux and ensure that the harvesting arrays didn't melt into slag. It was boring. It was repetitive. It was the best job I ever had because it paid a hazard bonus that could buy a small moon if you survived long enough to spend it. I didn't want a moon. I just wanted enough to pay the chirurgeons on Mars. I looked down at the photo taped to the side of my console. It was a physical print, rare and crinkled at the edges. Ilara was smiling in the picture. She was standing in a field of synthetic grain, the wind catching her hair. She looked healthy. She looked alive. I ran my thumb over her face, a ritual I performed 100 times a shift. The paper was wearing thin under my touch. Beneath the image, the metadata scrolled in a loop on the console's secondary display. Subject, Ilara. Status, critical. Last updated. Data corrupted. 999.41. The date was an error, a glitch in the station's chronometer that IT never bothered to fix. It didn't matter. The only number that mattered was the credit balance in my savings account. I was close. 2 more rotations. Just 2 more. Then the hum changed. The station always hummed. It was a low throbbing vibration that lived in your teeth. It was the sound of the void shields wrestling with the radiation of a star. You learned to ignore it the same way you ignored the beating of your own heart. But this was different. The pitch dropped. It went from a mechanical drone to a wet, guttural growl. It lasted for less than a second, then snapped back to normal. I blinked. I looked at the main array. There was a spot on the sun. At first I thought it was a dead pixel on my monitor. I tapped the screen with my knuckle. The spot didn't move. Wasn't on the glass. Was out there. Amidst the swirling gold and angry orange of the solar corona, there was a pinprick of absolute darkness. It wasn't a sunspot. Sunspots are cooler regions of plasma. They look dark, but they still emit light. This was different. This was a void. It was a hole in the fire. It looked like someone had taken a needle and poked a hole through reality itself. My hands hovered over the keyboard. Protocol was clear. Any spectral anomaly, no matter how small, required a code vermilion alert. That meant a full system shutdown. That meant purging the capacitor banks. That meant the station went dark for a week, while the Magos and his tech priests chanted binary prayers and rubbed sacred oils on the lenses. And it meant no harvest. No harvest meant no quota. No quota meant no hazard bonus. I did the math in my head. It took me 3 seconds. If I reported this, I would lose 6 months of wages. Ilara's treatment would be delayed. She didn't have 6 months. The last message from the hospice said her cellular degradation was accelerating. She needed the graft now. If I called this in, I wasn't being a diligent employee. I was being her executioner. I looked at the black spot again. It was tiny, insignificant. Probably just a sensor ghost, a piece of space debris momentarily blocking the feed. The universe was full of dust. Why should I bankrupt my future for a speck of dust? I made my choice. I typed rapidly, my fingers dancing over the rune keys. Log entry 44 Alpha, sensor array 7 reporting signal degradation. Cause hardware malfunction. Lens calibration required during next maintenance cycle. No critical variants detected. I lied. I lied to the machine spirit. I lied to the station commander. I lied to the God Emperor himself. I categorized the impossible darkness as a dirty lens. I pressed enter. The command line flashed green. Accepted. A wave of relief washed over me, followed immediately by the heavy, oily weight of guilt. I told myself it was for her. Everything was for her. I looked back at the photo. Her smile seemed a little tighter than before, but that was just my imagination. The mind plays tricks in the deep dark. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling a breath I didn't know I was holding. The station's hum remained steady. The lights didn't flicker. The world didn't end because I fudged a report. See, it was fine. It was just a glitch. I reached for my water again, my hand brushing against my chest. I froze. Clipped to my heavy uniform tunic was my RAD badge. Every crew member wore one. It was a simple strip of reactive heavy-gauge plastic. White meant safe. Green meant low exposure. Blue meant get to the infirmary. My badge was pulsing. It wasn't blue. It wasn't the angry red of a reactor leak. It was a sickly, jaundiced yellow. I had never seen it that color before. It wasn't in the manual. The light from the badge throbbed in time with that new lower frequency of the station's hum. Thump, thump, thump. Like a heartbeat that was too slow to be human. I stared at it. The logical part of my brain screamed at me to stand up, to run to the decontamination showers, to sound the alarm I had just suppressed. But I didn't move. I couldn't. I was paralyzed by a sudden irrational thought. If I acknowledge the badge, I acknowledge the anomaly. If I acknowledge the anomaly, I lose the money. I took the badge off. My fingers were steady, which terrified me. I unclipped the plastic strip and dropped it into the drawer of my desk. I slid the drawer shut. The yellow pulsing light disappeared into the shadow. The silence stayed. Just a glitch, I whispered to the empty room. My voice sounded flat, swallowed instantly by the recycled air. I turned back to the screen. The black spot was still there. And for a second, just a fraction of a second, I thought I saw it get wider. I kept cleaning the data. There was nothing else to do. Chapter 2. Singing in the Static. The mess hall was the only place on Helios Omega that didn't smell like ozone. Instead, it smelled of recycled sweat and the cloyingly sweet chemical scent of nutrient paste. We called it corpse starch, when the officers weren't listening, though we knew it was mostly algae. I sat across from Jonas. He was my only friend out here in the void. We had signed our contracts on the same day, two desperate men looking for a way out of the hive slums. But looking at him now, I saw a ghost. His skin was the color of old parchment, translucent and waxy. Dark circles hung under his eyes like bruises. He was staring into his bowl of gray sludge, as if it held the secrets of the universe, his spoon trembling in his hand. "You look terrible," I said. It wasn't an insult. It was a diagnosis. Jonas tried to smile, but the skin around his lips cracked. "Just tired, Lucan." The hum. It gets in my head. Can't sleep. He raised a hand to wipe his nose, and when he pulled it away, his glove was smeared with bright arterial crimson. It wasn't a trickle. It was a steady flow. He stared at the blood with a detached curiosity, as if it belonged to someone else. This was the third time this week. The med servitors had dismissed it as dry air, but air doesn't make a man look like he's hollowing out from the inside. I couldn't watch him fade away. I stood up, leaving my bowl untouched. "Stay there," I told him. "Don't move." I walked to the back of the mess hall toward the caged counter where Scylla held court. Scylla was the quartermaster, a woman who had replaced her left eye with a cheap bionic lens that whirred whenever she focused. She knew the value of everything on the station, including human misery. She was cleaning a bolt pistol when I approached, the smell of gun oil clinging to her thick apron. She didn't look up. "Kitchen's closed." "Lucan." "Eat your slop." "I need painkillers," I said, leaning close to the wire mesh. "The good stuff. Military grade. Not the chalk they give us in the infirmary." Scylla's bionic eye whirred, zooming in on my face. She smirked, revealing teeth stained by stim chews. "That's restricted inventory. Officer rations. What makes you think a grade 4 tech can afford the Emperor's mercy?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out my ration chits for the next week. 7 days of protein bars, fruit synthetics, and water credits. It was everything I had. I pushed them through the slot. "Take it," I said. "All of it." Scylla looked at the chits, then at me. Her smirk vanished, replaced by a look of genuine confusion. "You'll starve, you idiot." For him, he's already half dead. "Just give me the pills, Scylla." She shook her head, muttering about fools and martyrs, but she slid a small, foil-wrapped packet across the metal counter. I swiped it before she could change her mind. My stomach growled, a sharp reminder of the hunger that would be my companion for the next week, but the weight of the packet in my hand felt better than a full belly. It felt like control. I walked back to the table and dropped the packet next to Jonas's hand. He looked at it, then up at me, his eyes wet. "Lucan. How these are." "Station issued," I lied smoothly. I sat back down. I filed a complaint with HR about the air filters. They sent these as compensation. "Take 2 now. They'll stop the headache." He knew I was lying. I could see it in the way his jaw tightened, the way he hesitated. But pain makes cowards of us all. He tore the foil open and dry swallowed 2 of the white tablets. I watched him, feeling a warm glow of satisfaction. I was a good man. I was taking care of my own. I wasn't just a cog in the machine. I was a brother. Then the speakers crackled. It wasn't the usual announcements about shift changes or safety protocols. It was a sharp, high-pitched feedback squeal that made everyone in the mess hall flinch. But then, under the static, there was something else. A sound. A rhythm. It sounded like a choir singing in a cathedral located at the bottom of an ocean. Muffled, distorted, polyphonic. It wasn't music. It was a mathematical arrangement of noise that mimicked music. The fork fell from my hand. A sharp electric jolt shot through my jaw. My back teeth, the ones filled with cheap amalgam, started to vibrate. It wasn't a sound I heard with my ears. It was a sound I felt in the roots of my skull. It was a resonance frequency that tasted like copper. "Do you hear that?" I asked, looking around. The other workers were looking up at the voxcasters, their faces blank. No one screamed. No one covered their ears. They just listened entranced as the static rose and fell in a breathing rhythm. I looked back at Jonas. The drugs were kicking in. His shoulders had slumped, but the nosebleed hadn't stopped. A single heavy drop of blood fell from his chin. It hit the surface of his gray soup, but it didn't disperse. It didn't mix. The red drop sat on top of the gray sludge, perfectly spherical, refusing to break its surface tension. Then, as the singing and the static reached a crescendo, the blood drop began to spin. It spun faster and faster, a tiny red planet on a gray horizon. Orin, one of the medical staff, was sitting at the next table. She stood up, her eyes wide, staring at Jonas's bowl. She saw it too. We locked eyes. In her gaze, I saw the reflection of my own sudden cold fear. This wasn't sickness. This wasn't radiation. "Jonas," I said softly. He didn't hear me. He was humming along with the static. A low, discordant sound that matched the vibration in my teeth. The blood drop stopped spinning and collapsed into the shape of a perfect 8-pointed star. Then it dissolved, turning the soup a majestic, terrifying purple. "I feel better," Jonas whispered. He smiled and his teeth were stained red. "I feel so much better." I didn't eat for the rest of the shift. The hunger was there, gnawing at my ribs, but the nausea was stronger. The singing stopped after a minute, but the silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with a threat I couldn't name. I touched my jaw, checking if my teeth were still loose. They weren't. But the taste of copper didn't leave my mouth. It wasn't mercy. It was just the beginning. Chapter 3. The Fatal Variance. The Data Cathedral was a misnomer. There was nothing holy about it, unless you considered vast banks of overheating servers and the smell of ozone to be sacred. This was the brain of Helios Omega, a towering chamber of brass and iron, where the station's logic engines crunched the numbers of our existence. The air here was kept freezing to cool the cogitators, creating a permanent mist that clung to the floor like a shroud. I walked through the rows of humming monoliths, my boots clicking on the grating. I wasn't supposed to be here during the prayer cycle, but the image on my screen wouldn't leave me alone. The black spot on the sun hadn't vanished. It had doubled in size. It wasn't just a dead pixel anymore. It was a tumor eating the light. I found Magos Varric at the central altar. He was a terrifying silhouette against the wall of blinking status lights. Varric had discarded most of his humanity decades ago. Where his legs should have been, a nest of piston-driven limbs supported his bulk. His face was a mask of gold and circuitry, with optical lenses that zoomed and clicked in perpetual agitation. He was anointing the main console with sacred unguents, muttering binary code in a low rhythmic chant. "Magos," I said, my voice sounding small in the vast echo of the room. "We have a variance, a fatal variance." Varric didn't turn around. One of his mechadendrites, a snake-like metal tentacle extending from his spine, snapped in my direction, examining the data slate I held out. The Omnissiah knows all Lucan. The harvest is optimal. The flux is within tolerance. Do not disturb the hymn. His voice was a synthesized grate, lacking any warmth or cadence of a human throat. "It's not within tolerance," I pressed, stepping closer, though every instinct told me to run. "Look at the spectral bands. The corona is bleeding energy into nothingness. It's a violation of thermal dynamics. If we don't vent the capacitors, the feedback loop will fry the shielding." Varric finally turned. His optical lenses spun, glowing a harsh red. He loomed over me, a monument to the superiority of steel over flesh. "You see with eyes of meat," he rasped. You look for errors where there is only the grand design. The darkness is not a void technician. It is a pause, a breath. The star is singing a new song, and you are too small to hear the melody. He knocked the slate from my hand. It clattered to the floor, the screen cracking. Return to your post. Pray for clarity. I watched him turn back to his machine, his metal fingers caressing the keys. He wasn't going to save us. He was going to watch us burn and call it a miracle. I knelt down to pick up my broken slate, but my hand went to my pocket instead. I had prepared for this. If the command structure failed, I needed insurance. I needed proof. If the station went critical, the evacuation protocols required hard data to authorize the escape pods. Without it, they would leave us here to rot. I pulled out a heavy unauthorized data drive, a black box I had bought from a smuggler years ago. It was illegal tech shielded against EMPs and radiation. I waited until Varric was deep in his trance, his back to me. I reached under the subconsole and found the hardline port. I slotted the drive in. The download bar appeared on my retina display, transferring 20%, 40%. It felt like it was taking hours. My heart hammered against my ribs loud enough I feared to disturb the Magos. I wasn't just stealing logs. I was stealing the evidence of their negligence. I was stealing a ticket home for me and Alara, 60%, 80%. The data stream was heavy corrupted. The file names were gibberish symbols that hurt my eyes to look at. 99%, complete. I yanked the drive out and shoved it deep into the inner pocket of my tunic, right against my chest. I turned to leave, walking fast, trying to look casual. I passed a servitor, one of the lobotomized cyborg drones that swept the floors. Usually they were mindless, staring at nothing, focused only on their task. But as I passed, this one stopped. It lifted its head. Its eyes were sewn shut, covered by a brass plate, but it turned its face directly toward me. It tracked my movement. Its mouth, a slack ruin of pale flesh, twitched. "Thief," it whispered, not with a mechanical voice, but with the voice of a young girl. I froze. The temperature in the room seemed to drop another 10 degrees. I waited for the alarm for Varric to scream for the security drones to cut me down, but nothing happened. The servitor went back to sweeping the floor as if it had never spoken. I hurried out of the cathedral, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. I reached the corridor and leaned against the wall, trembling. That's when I felt it. The drive in my pocket. It wasn't connected to anything. It had no power source. It was just a block of memory crystals and plastic. But against my ribs, through the fabric of my uniform, I felt it pulse. Once. Twice. Rhythmic and strong. It had a heartbeat, and it was beating in time with mine.
Chapter 4. Inverted Shadows.
The cargo bay was a cavern of rusted iron and echoing silence vast enough to swallow a cathedral. It was the only place on the station with a viewport that wasn't filtered by the thick, polarized lenses of the observation deck. Here, there was just a sheet of armor-glass between us and the infinite dark. I stood by the railing looking down into the abyss, waiting for Scylla. The black box in my pocket felt heavy, warm like a fever against my ribs. I needed a way to encrypt it, to hide it deeper. I thought Scylla might have a lead on a stasis casket or a reinforced locker, something that Varric's scanning eyes couldn't penetrate. "You shouldn't be down here, Lucan." Scylla's voice came from the shadows of a shipping container. She didn't look at me. She was watching the maintenance crew out on the hull. Through the glass, I could see them 5 figures in bulky yellow void suits, magnetized to the outer skin of the station. They looked like toys against the backdrop of the burning star. They were welding a rupture in the thermal plating sparks, flying silently into the vacuum. The sun was angry today. Its light wasn't the warm yellow of memory. It was shifting bruising into a deep, sickly magenta at the edges. "Just watching the show," I muttered, moving to stand beside her. "They're working close to the coronal ejection zone. It's dangerous. Hazard pay." Silas spat, chewing on a stim stick. "They know the risks. Greed makes us do stupid things." "Right, Lucan." She eyed the bulge in my pocket but didn't say anything else. She knew. In this place everyone had secrets, and everyone was guilty. Then the light changed. It happened instantly. The sun flared a silent scream of energy that washed over the station. The automatic filters on the viewport slammed shut, darkening the glass, but not before I saw it. The shadows of the men on the hull. They didn't stretch out behind them. Physics dictates that a shadow is cast away from the light source. But out there, under the influence of that wrong purple light, the shadows of the workers detached themselves from the hull. They didn't lie flat. They stood up. Two-dimensional silhouettes peeled themselves off the metal and stood upright, facing the men who cast them. "Did you see that?" My voice cracked. Scylla gripped the railing, her knuckles white. "Refraction," she whispered, but she didn't believe it. Just a trick of the glass. It wasn't a trick. The shadows reached out. They were impossibly black, deeper than the void around them, holes in the universe where light could not exist. The workers didn't seem to notice at first. Then the lid welder turned. I saw him freeze. He raised his hand, perhaps to wave, perhaps to scream. His shadow mimicked the movement, but faster. The shadow's hand passed through the man's helmet. The man convulsed. His suit didn't rupture. There was no explosion of air. He just crumpled, like a puppet with its strings cut. Then he began to float away, demagnetized, drifting into the open mouth of space. "They're killing them," I shouted. I lunged for the wall-mounted Vox unit. "I have to warn them." Scylla grabbed my arm. Her grip was iron hard. "Don't," she hissed. "Don't draw attention to us. If that's an anomaly, the sensors are already screaming. You can't save them." "They're dying out there." I shoved her back. I didn't care about the protocol. I didn't care about the risk. For a moment, I wasn't a thief or a coward. I was a human being watching other human beings be erased. I grabbed the handset and keyed the general frequency. "Maintenance Team 7, this is Lucan disengage. Look at your shadows. Get back to the airlock now." Static hissed back at me. Then a voice. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a plea for help. It was laughter. Wet, gurgling laughter that sounded like it was bubbling up through a throat full of oil. "Lucan," the voice on the radio giggled. "The light. It tickles. It's so warm inside the shadow. Come out and play." I dropped the handset. It dangled by its cord, swinging back and forth, the laughter continuing to echo from the speaker, mixing with the sound of bones snapping. Out on the hull, the remaining 4 figures were no longer fighting. They were dancing. They twirled and spun in the vacuum, embraced by their own upright shadows, drifting further and further away from the station, falling toward the purple sun. I backed away, my breath hitching in my chest. The silence in the cargo bay was deafening. Scylla walked over to the viewport. She watched the yellow specks disappear into the glare. She didn't look horrified anymore. She looked calculating. "That team," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "That was the primary engineering crew." She turned to me, her bionic eye whirring softly as it adjusted to the dim light. "That leaves 4 operational escape pods for the entire sector." She looked at me then at the door. "Better hurry, Lucan." I ran. I didn't look back at the glass. I didn't want to see if my own shadow was following me. Chapter 5, Redacted Reality. The station didn't scream when the lockdown started. It just went numb. First, the external Vox channels died. Then the intranet slowed to a crawl, choking on packets of censored data. I sat in the auxiliary server room surrounded by the deafening white noise of cooling fans watching the truth disappear. Lines of code vanished from the terminal in front of me, replaced by generic system maintenance tags. The deaths on the hull scrubbed. The spectral anomaly deleted. The singing in the static. Just an audio codec error. Magos Varric was rewriting history in real time. He was building a cage of ignorance around us, and we were helping him weld the bars. I held my personal slate in my trembling hands. I was trying to find a route to the escape pods that bypassed the main security checkpoints, but the map kept glitching. The corridors were shifting on the screen, rearranging themselves into impossible geometries. Then the device buzzed. A single crisp chime that cut through the drone of the fans. A message notification. My heart hammered against my ribs. We were cut off. No signal could get in or out through the solar interference. I looked at the sender ID. From Ilara. I stopped breathing. My thumb hovered over the screen. It was impossible. She was in a stasis hospice on Mars, millions of miles away. The signal lag alone would take 20 minutes, and the comms were down. I opened it. I am well, Lucan. The treatment is working. Please remember to hydrate. The air is dry today. I read it once, then twice. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. It wasn't relief I felt. It was a creeping, icy dread. I had received this exact message before, word for word, punctuation for punctuation. I scrolled back through the archives. There it was 30 days ago, and again 60 days ago. It wasn't a letter from a sister. It was a script, a pre-recorded loop designed to keep a worker docile. How long had she been gone? Had she ever been there? The face in the photo, the voice in my memories. Were they real or just another file in the database? I deleted the message. It didn't make me feel better. I couldn't stay here. The patrols were increasing. I could hear the heavy metallic tread of the Skitarii guards in the hallway. They were searching for contraband for heretical data. I checked the black box. I couldn't keep it in my tunic. It was too bulky, too obvious. I sat on the floor and pulled off my left boot. With a small laser cutter I used for splicing fiber cables, I carved a hollow into the thick rubber of the heel. It was a crude hiding spot, but it was the only one I had. I pressed the black box into the cavity. It fit, but just barely. As I slid my foot back in and laced the boot tight, I gasped. The drive was hot. Not warm hot. It felt like a coal from a fire pressing against my heel through the thin fabric of my sock. I stood up and put my weight on it. A sharp sear of pain shot up my leg. It was burning me, slowly, steadily cooking the skin. I gritted my teeth. I needed the pain. The pain was proof I was still awake. The pain was the only thing that felt real in a world that was being redacted. I walked out of the room, limping slightly every step, a reminder of the secret I carried. In the corridor, a servitor was scrubbing a stain on the wall, a scorch mark that looked suspiciously like the silhouette of a hand. The cyborg didn't have eyes, just a brass plate bolted over the upper half of its face. It paused as I limped past, its head tilted, tracking the heat source in my boot. "It is hungry," the servitor whispered. Its voice was flat, devoid of intent, like a radio picking up a stray frequency. I stopped. "What?" The servitor resumed, scrubbing the wire brush grinding against the metal wall. "The data," it said, the words barely audible over the scraping. "It eats the silence. It is so very hungry." I didn't ask what it meant. I walked faster, the burn on my heel intensifying with every step. I told myself it was just a malfunction. But deep down, I knew the truth. The drive wasn't just storing the data, it was feeding on it. And I was the plate. Chapter 6. The Silent Ritual. The medical bay was no longer a place of healing. It had become a holding cell for the damned. The air was thick with the chemical stench of disinfectant, but it couldn't mask the underlying smell of copper and ozone. the scent of the anomaly. The tech priests had set up portable static generators in the corners of the room. They were massive, ugly machines that churned out a wall of white noise designed to scramble the heretical frequencies coming from the sun. It didn't work. The static just added a layer of mechanical screaming to the voices already whispering in our heads. It made my teeth ache. It made the burn on my heel throb in time with the flickering lights. I walked past rows of empty beds to the isolation unit at the back. The privacy curtains were drawn, but they couldn't hide the sounds of struggle. Jonas was there, or at least the meat that used to be Jonas was there. He was strapped to a steel gurney with heavy leather restraints. The leather creaked and groaned as he thrashed against it. His skin had changed. It was no longer pale. It was translucent, like wax paper held up to a flame. Beneath the surface, I could see his veins. They weren't blue. They were pulsing with a dark violet fluid that moved sluggishly, as if it had a will of its own. He was muttering a stream of nonsense that occasionally coalesced into terrifying clarity. "The sun is a door," he whispered, frothing at the mouth. "The lock is melting. The key is in the bone." I stood over him. I looked at his hands. His fingers were broken, twisted at impossible angles from straining against the straps. He had done that to himself. He had broken his own body trying to get to the light. I reached for the surgical tray next to the bed. My hand closed around a scalpel. It was small silver and perfectly clean. The fluorescent light glinted off the blade. I told myself it was love. I told myself that letting him live like this, transforming into something that wasn't human, was the greater cruelty. This was the only gift I had left to give him. I positioned the blade over his carotid artery. My hand shook, but only a little. Just one cut. One slice to set him free from the choir singing in his veins. Jonas stopped thrashing. He went perfectly still. He opened his eyes. The whites were gone. The irises had dissolved into pools of swirling purple ink, like oil on water. He looked right at me. He looked right through me. "Do it, Lucan," he wheezed. "Cut the string. Let me fly." I tightened my grip. I breathed in. I was going to do it. I was going to save him. Then the door hissed open. Arin walked in carrying a tray of sedatives. She froze when she saw me leaning over him. The scalpel was still in my hand, poised inches from his throat. Panic, cold, and sharp flooded my chest. If she reported me, I would be purged. I wouldn't make it to the escape pods. I wouldn't save Alara. The equation in my head shifted instantly. Self-preservation overrode mercy. "Lucan," she asked, her voice trembling. "What are you doing?" I didn't confess. I didn't beg. I slid the scalpel up my sleeve in a blur of motion, a magician's trick born of pure cowardice. With my other hand, I pulled out my data slate and tapped the record button. "I'm documenting the symptoms," I said. My voice sounded flat professional, a lie that tasted like ash and bile. "If we understand the progression, maybe we can cure it." Listen to him, Arin. It's important data. Jonas screamed then. It wasn't a scream of pain. It was a scream of betrayal. It was a high, keen wail that shattered the last piece of friendship between us. He knew. He knew I had chosen my safety over his soul. Arin looked at me with disgust, her eyes darting from the slate to my face. She knew I was lying, but she didn't have the energy to fight me. She just walked past me and injected the sedative into his neck. Jonas went limp. The silence returned heavy, and judging broken only by the hiss of the static generators. I pocketed the slate. I had his scream recorded. It was high-quality audio. It would add value to the package. I took a pair of polarized aviator glasses from my pocket and slid them onto my face. The lights in the room were getting too bright, stinging my retinas. Or maybe I just didn't want anyone to see that my eyes were dry. "Keep him sedated," I said to Arin's back. I walked out. The black box in my boot burned hot against my skin, searing the flesh, branding me. I didn't limp this time. I walked with the steady, measured pace of a man who has decided that survival is the only morality left. Chapter 7. The Violet Eclipse. The end of the world didn't come with a bang. It came with a color. I was back in the observation deck, drawn there by a compulsion I couldn't name, like a moth spiraling toward a candle flame. The room was packed. Technicians, officers, even the lowly scullery workers had gathered at the arm of glass, pressing their faces against the reinforced transparency. We were all watching the same thing. The black spot on the sun had stopped growing. It had won. In a single heartbeat, the blinding gold of the solar disk collapsed. It inverted. The star turned inside out. The light that washed over us wasn't sunlight. It was the color of a fresh bruise, a deep, violaceous purple that hurt the eyes to look at. It didn't illuminate, it stained. It soaked into the metal of the bulkheads, turning the gray steel into a sickly, throbbing mauve. It soaked into our skin, making us look like corpses left out in the rain. And then came the wave. It wasn't a shockwave of force, it was a shockwave of silence. The station's hum, that constant, reassuring vibration of the void shields, died instantly. The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavy like water filling your lungs. Then the temperature plummeted. I watched the glass in front of me frost over in seconds. Fractal patterns of ice raced across the viewport, obscuring the purple sun. The air in the room turned to mist. Beside me, a junior lieutenant dropped to his knees, clutching his chest. His breath came out in thick white clouds. Cold, he gasped his teeth, chattering so hard I thought they would shatter. It's so cold. The cold was unnatural. It wasn't just the absence of heat. It was the presence of the void. It bit through thermal layers, through skin, through muscle, freezing the marrow in the bone. People began to fall. They curled into fetal balls, shivering violently, their lips turning blue, then black. The condensation on the ceiling froze and fell as snow, a grim winter inside a metal tin floating in hell. I fell too. Darkness took me not from the cold, but from the sheer sensory overload of the shift. I don't know how long I was out. Minutes, hours. Time had become elastic, stretching and snapping back without rhythm. I woke up on the deck, plating. The room was a tomb. The emergency lights had kicked in, bathing the frozen tableau in a flickering crimson strobe. Around me, dozens of crew members lay huddled together, unconscious or dead, their bodies covered in a fine layer of rime frost. The air was still freezing. I could see the ice crystals sparkling in the red light. I sat up. I waited for the shivers to rack my body. I waited for the biting pain in my fingers and toes. It never came. I looked at my hands. They weren't blue. They were flushed, warm, alive. I touched my face. My skin felt fever hot. I took a deep breath, and while the air tasted stale and metallic, it didn't burn my lungs. I looked at the lieutenant beside me. He was a statue of ice, his eyes frozen open in terror. I reached out and touched his arm. He was solid. Why wasn't I freezing? I stood up, moving easily among the frozen bodies. I felt a strange vibrating heat radiating from my right heel, where the black box was hidden. It was pumping warmth into me, circulating a fire through my veins that fought back the chill of the warp. It felt violating. It felt good. I looked down at my chest. I remembered the rad badge I had hidden in my drawer days ago. I had put it back on this morning, a force of habit. I unclipped it and held it up to the emergency light. It wasn't yellow anymore. It wasn't red. The strip was black, pitch black, an absorbing abyssal matte black that drank the red light of the emergency strobe. It was the color of a dead star. The manual said black meant immediate organ failure. It meant you were already a walking corpse. I checked my pulse. It was slow, steady, strong. I clipped the badge back onto my tunic. I looked around at the room full of dying people shivering in their sleep. I felt a terrible detachment settle over me. I wasn't like them anymore. The cold couldn't touch me. The sun couldn't burn me. I was something else. I walked to the door, stepping over the frozen hand of the man who had been standing next to me. I didn't look back. The cold was for the living, and I wasn't sure I was one of them anymore. Chapter 8. The Sleepwalkers. The corridors of Helios Omega were designed to facilitate the movement of hundreds of personnel during shift changes. They were wide utilitarian and usually loud, with the tramp of boots and the chatter of voices. Now they were silent, save for the soft, wet sound of bare feet slapping against metal. I pressed myself into a recessed maintenance alcove, holding my breath. They were coming. The crew, my colleagues, my neighbors, were walking in a dense column down the center of the hallway. They weren't wearing void suits. Most were in their sleeping fatigues. Some were naked. Their eyes were wide open, staring at a point in space that I couldn't see. They didn't blink. They didn't look at each other. They moved with a terrifying, synchronized fluidity, like a school of fish turning in the deep current. They were sleepwalking, but it was a guided sleep, a lucid nightmare shared by 1,000 minds. I saw Miller from engineering. His arm was broken, swinging loosely at his side, a jagged piece of white bone poking through the skin. He didn't seem to notice. He just kept walking, his face a mask of serene, blank purpose. I waited for them to pass. I was invisible to them. I was the anomaly. I was the cancer cell that refused to join the body. Then I saw Aaron. She wasn't sleepwalking. She was flattened against the opposite wall, trapped by the river of bodies. She was awake. Her eyes were darting, frantically filled with the raw animal panic of a prey beast cornered. She held a medical waste bin in front of her like a shield. She saw me. Her eyes locked onto mine from across the corridor. She opened her mouth to scream my name, to beg for help. "Lucan," she mouthed. No sound came out, but I read the shape of the word. One of the sleepwalkers stopped. It was Scylla. The quartermaster turned her head slowly, her bionic eye whirring loudly in the silence. It focused on Erin. Then, without a sound, Scylla lunged. It wasn't an attack of anger. It was mechanical. Scylla grabbed Erin by the hair and slammed her head against the bulkhead. The sound was a sickening, hollow crack. I stepped forward. My body reacted before my brain did. I was going to help her. I had to. I had already failed Jonas. I couldn't watch Oren die. I took one step out of the alcove, my hand reaching for the heavy wrench clipped to my belt. Then the floor tilted. It wasn't the station moving. It was me. A jolt of agonizing heat shot up from my right heel, paralyzing my leg. The black box, hidden in my boot, vibrated violently, sending a resonance frequency straight up my tibia, through my spine and into the base of my skull. It was so loud it drowned out the world, and in that vibration there was a voice. It was Alara's voice. "Don't stop, Lucan," she whispered. It was the voice of a little girl, but it sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a well, wet and distorted. "They are just meat. I am waiting. Bring me home." I froze. The wrench slipped from my sweaty palm and clattered to the deck. The sound drew Scylla's attention. She looked up from Arin's crumpled form. Blood was matting Arin's hair, but she was still moving feebly, trying to push Scylla away. Scylla's bionic eye locked onto me. For a second I thought she would attack, but she didn't. She smiled a grotesque, slack-jawed expression and turned back to Erin. She placed her hands around Erin's throat. "Bring me home," the voice in my head insisted, sweet and demanding. "Walk away." I looked at Erin. Our eyes met one last time. She wasn't pleading anymore. She looked resigned. She looked disappointed. I stepped back into the shadows. I turned my back on them. As I hurried away down the empty junction, I heard the wet snap of cartilage. I didn't stop. I didn't run. I just walked the heat in my boot, urging me forward, a steady, rhythmic pulse that felt like approval. Behind me, the armor-glass of the observation windows finally gave way. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the ship, and the purple light flooded in, chasing me down the hall. Chapter 9. The Breach. The Grand Hall was the heart of the station, a vaulted atrium where the statues of imperial saints looked down upon the workers with stone indifference. Now those statues were weeping tears of black oil. I burst into the hall, my lungs burning the sound of the shattering armor-glass behind me like a tidal wave of diamonds. But the wave that followed wasn't air. It was the light. The violet radiance flooded the atrium, heavy and physical, rolling over the floor like a dense fog. It didn't move like light. It moved like liquid, filling the spaces between the pillars, swirling around the knees of the gathered crowd. The sleepwalkers were there, hundreds of them. They stood in the center of the hall, their faces turned upward, their arms raised in silent supplication. They weren't afraid. They looked ecstatic. In the center of them, all on the raised dais, usually reserved for morning prayers, stood Magos Varric. He wasn't cowering. He wasn't trying to fix the breach. He had removed his heavy red robes, revealing the grotesquerie of his augmented body, a cage of brass ribs and piston-driven legs. He opened his arms wide, embracing the oncoming storm of purple fire. "Witness!" Varric roared. His voice was no longer the flat monotone of a machine. It was rich, booming, amplified by the very air itself. The binary is broken. The logic is flawed. Flesh is a trap, and steel is a prison. The violet light hit him. I expected him to scream. I expected his organic components to boil and his metal to melt. But he didn't scream. He laughed. The fire engulfed him, but it didn't consume him. Instead, it changed him. I watched, paralyzed by horror, as the gold plating on his face began to run like wax. The metal didn't drip away. It fused with the flesh beneath. His mechadendrites, the metal tentacles on his back, writhed and snapped, shedding their mechanical casings to reveal glistening muscular tendrils of raw purple meat. The violet fire does not burn. Varric shouted, the flames licking at his eyes, turning the lenses into glowing pits of hell. It enlightens. It purifies. Cleansing is mercy. Around him, the sleepwalkers who were touched by the light began to change too. Their skin sloughed off like wet paper, revealing something harder, sharper underneath. But Varric was the conductor of this symphony of mutation. He grew taller, his form expanding as the warp energy poured into him. He was no longer a priest of Mars. He was something new, a burning saint of a dead star. I backed away, trying to make myself small, trying to hide behind a weeping statue. But the black box in my boot pulsed. It wasn't a warm pulse this time. It was a sharp, jagged spike of cold that made me gasp. Varric's head snapped toward me. The fire around him swirled, reacting to my presence. Among 1,000 souls embracing the change, I was the only one resisting. I was a void in his new world. A glitch. "You," Varric rumbled. He stepped down from the dais, his new organic metal claws clicking on the stone floor. The sound was wet and heavy. "Why do you not burn, technician? The song is singing to you. Why do your cells refuse the chorus?" He pointed a finger at me. A beam of concentrated violet light shot from the tip, striking the pillar next to my head. The stone didn't shatter. It screamed. It turned into a pillar of writhing snakes before dissolving into dust. "You are a system error," Varric hissed, his voice dropping to a subsonic growl that vibrated in my chest. "Errors must be debugged." He started to run. He moved with a terrifying spider-like speed, his piston legs churning the air. He was coming for me. Not to kill me, but to fix me. I didn't wait to explain. I didn't wait to see what he would do when he caught me. I turned and sprinted toward the ventilation access, the only path too small for a monster to follow. Behind me, the laughter of the burning saint echoed off the walls, promising a salvation I would die to avoid. Chapter 10. The Iron Labyrinth. The ventilation shafts were the intestines of the station. They were cramped rectangular tubes of galvanized steel that smelled of ancient dust and recycled ozone. I crawled on my hands and knees, the grating biting into my skin through the fabric of my uniform. It was dark, lit only by the intermittent flash of emergency strobes filtering up through the floor vents. Every few meters, I had to squeeze past a bundle of thick, greasy cables that pulsed with the erratic heartbeat of the dying station. The air here was thick and hot, tasting of copper. It was hard to breathe, but it was safer than the hallways. Down there, the light was hunting. Up here, there was only the dust and the dark. I moved mechanically. Left hand, right knee. Right hand, left knee. My mind had shut down the parts that felt fear. I was no longer processing the horror of Varric's transformation or the guilt of leaving Aaron behind. I was just an object in motion, a variable in an equation of survival. The black box in my boot had stopped burning. Now it felt heavy, a cold anchor dragging my foot down with every movement. It was quiet. Too quiet. It was listening. I reached a junction where the shaft widened into a service nexus. A massive industrial turbine was spinning slowly at the far end, its blades slicing the air with a rhythmic, hypnotic whoosh thump. Whoosh thump. The draft pulled at my clothes. I stopped to catch my breath, leaning against the metal wall. That's when I heard the weeping. It wasn't the sound of a child or a victim. It was the wet, gurgling sound of a throat that had changed shape. A figure dragged itself out of the shadows near the turbine. It was wearing the tattered remains of a standard gray jumpsuit. "Jonas," I said. The name tasted like ash in my mouth. It was him. And it wasn't. The drugs I had given him, the sedatives Aaron had injected, they hadn't stopped the change. They had only delayed it, twisting it. His skin was gray and sloughing off in wet patches, revealing muscle that glowed with a faint violet luminescence. His jaw was unhinged, hanging loosely against his chest. But his eyes were still Jonas. They were filled with a terrible, lucid confusion. "Lucan," he slurred. His voice was a ruin. I waited. You said you'd come back." He blocked the path. The only way forward was past him, past the spinning blades of the turbine. He tried to stand his limbs, trembling with an unnatural, jerky energy. He reached out to me. His hand was no longer a hand. The fingers had fused together into a bone-like spur. "It hurts," Jonas whispered. "The song, it's too loud. Make it stop. Please. You have the numbers. You always fix the numbers." He lunged. It wasn't an attack. It was a desperate embrace. He wanted comfort. He wanted his friend. But I looked at the bone spur on his arm and I didn't see my friend. I saw an obstacle. I saw a threat to the data. I saw a delay. I didn't hesitate. I didn't cry out. As he threw his weight against me, I didn't cage him. I stepped to the side and used his own momentum against him. I shoved him hard, my hands pressing into the wet, hot meat of his back. He stumbled. He flailed. He fell backward into the intake of the turbine. There was no scream, just a heavy, sickening thud of meat hitting metal, followed by the sharp screech of the fan blades grinding against bone. The rhythmic whoosh thump faltered for a second, then resumed. A fine mist sprayed out from the other side of the fan, invisible in the dark. I stood there for a moment, watching the blades spin. They were clean again. The obstruction was cleared. I fixed it, I whispered. I didn't feel sick. I didn't feel sad. I checked my boot to make sure the drive was secure, and then I crawled past the turbine, deeper into the dark. The path was open. That was all that mattered. Chapter 11. Machine Prayer. The core of the station's machine spirit was a spherical chamber suspended in a magnetic field. It was the holiest place on Helios Omega, and the coldest. Here, the air was scrubbed of all impurities, leaving a sterile vacuum that smelled of absolute zero and potential energy. I stood before the blast door that led to the reactor bridge. It was sealed. A meter of reinforced plasteel stood between me and the only route to the escape pods. The control panel was dark, the runes dead. The spirit of the station had gone dormant to protect itself from the purple infection spreading through its veins. I plugged my interface jack into the port. It was a crude connection, a physical violation of the machine's slumber. "Wake up," I typed. The keys clacked loudly in the silence. The screen flickered. Green text scrolled rapidly, then turned red. Access denied. Biological signature unrecognized. Entity status null. The machine didn't see me. Or rather, it saw what I was becoming. It saw the black box in my boot, the cold void where my fear used to be, and it decided I wasn't human anymore. I was a variable it couldn't calculate. Override, I typed again, my fingers flying. Authorization code Omicron 77. Open the door. Negative, the screen flashed. System integrity compromised. To proceed. User must provide collateral. Payment required. It wasn't asking for money. The machine spirit didn't care about credits. It dealt in the currency of the cogitator data, information, experience. To open the door, I had to give it something it didn't have. I had to feed it. "What do you want?" I whispered. The cursor blinked. Input emotional engram. Class. Joy. Reason. Scarcity. It wanted a memory. The station was dying, and in its final moments, the artificial intelligence was afraid. It wanted a distraction. It wanted to know what it felt like to be happy even for a microsecond. I hesitated. I knew what this meant. This wasn't a copy-paste operation. This was a cut and paste. If I gave the memory to the machine, I wouldn't have it anymore. It would be scrubbed from my neural pathways, overwritten by the command code to open the door. I thought of Ilara, not the sick girl in the hospital bed, but the girl she was before. I closed my eyes. I summoned the memory. It was a summer day in the biodomes. She was 6 years old. She was chasing a synthetic butterfly. She tripped and fell, but instead of crying, she laughed. It was a sound like wind chimes, bright and crystalline, a sound that made the heavy gray sky of the hive city seem blue. It was the only pure thing I owned. Accepting offer, the screen queried. I looked at the blast door. I looked at the dark corridor behind me, where the shadows were starting to detach from the walls. I had to survive. I had to get the data to Mars. If I died here, the memory died with me anyway. "Take it," I said. I pressed the enter key. A sharp spike of pain drove itself into my temple like an ice pick. It lasted only a second. I gasped, clutching the console for support. Then the pain vanished, and so did the day. I stood there, blinking. I knew I had a sister named Ilara. I knew she was sick. I knew I loved her. But when I tried to remember the sound of her voice when she was happy, there was nothing. Just a silent movie. A girl opening her mouth, her eyes crinkling but no sound coming out. The audio file was corrupt. The file was deleted. Transaction complete. The screen flashed. Door unlocked. The heavy pistons hissed. The blast door groaned and began to slide open. I stared at the gap widening in the metal. I felt a wetness on my cheek. I reached up and touched it. A tear. I stared at the moisture on my glove with genuine confusion. "Why am I crying?" I asked the machine. The machine didn't answer. The screen went dark. I wiped the tear away. It was just water. A physiological reaction to stress. Meaningless. I stepped through the door. I had forgotten the sound of joy, but the door was open. It was a fair trade. Chapter 12, Core of Hell. The bridge to the reactor core was a single span of grating, suspended over a star in miniature. Before the eclipse, this chamber held a contained fusion reaction, a blinding sphere of gold that powered the sector. Now, it held a hole in the world. Beneath the mesh of the walkway, the reactor pit was a swirling vortex of violent violet flame. It didn't roar like fire. It whispered like a billion voices screaming in unison. The heat was impossible. It didn't just blister the skin. It blistered the mind. It felt like walking through a fever dream, where the air itself was trying to digest you. The guardrails were glowing with a dull, malevolent cherry-red warping under the intensity of the exposure. I stepped onto the bridge. The metal groaned under my weight. Every step was a battle against the instinct to lie down and let the heat take me. The purple light rising from the pit cast long, distorted shadows that danced on the ceiling, enacting plays of torture and ecstasy. I kept my eyes fixed on the far door. That was the way out. That was the shuttle bay. Halfway across, the air shimmered. The heat haze coalesced into a shape. It was Alara. She was standing in the middle of the narrow bridge blocking my path. She wasn't the sick, dying girl I remembered. She was whole. She was wearing her favorite white dress, the one she wore on her 7th birthday. Her skin was luminous, untouched by the radiation or the rot. She held out her arms to me, her face beaming with that smile I had just sold to the machine. "Lucan," she called out. Her voice was clear, cutting through the whispering fire. "You look so tired. Put the burden down. Come here. It's warm. It's safe." I stopped. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I wanted to go to her. God, what I wanted it more than I wanted to breathe. The fire below didn't look scary anymore. It looked like a blanket. It looked like rest. I took a step toward her, my hand reaching out. I was ready to fall. I was ready to surrender. Then the black box in my boot woke up. It didn't vibrate this time. It bit. A surge of searing heat hotter than the reactor exploded against my heel. It felt like a branding iron being driven into the bone. The pain was absolute, blinding, white-hot agony that tore a scream from my throat. It shattered the trance instantly. The world snapped back into focus. The girl in the white dress flickered. The image distorted, turning into static, and then vanished. In her place stood a jagged piece of structural debris, a twisted girder jutting up from the walkway. If I had taken one more step to hug her, I would have impaled myself on the rusted iron. The black box hadn't saved me out of kindness. It saved me because a dead host cannot carry data. It owned me now. I gasped, swallowing mouthfuls of superheated air, and forced myself to limp forward. The pain in my foot was grounding. It was real. A few meters further, I came across a body. It had been dragged here, likely by the sleepwalkers, as an offering to the core. It was Arin. Her neck was twisted at an unnatural angle, and her eyes were wide, staring up at the ceiling she couldn't see. Her skin was beginning to turn that translucent gray, the warp infection taking hold even in death. I stopped. I looked down at the woman who had tried to help Jonas, the woman I had abandoned to Scylla. I waited for the grief. I waited for the crushing weight of remorse to bring me to my knees. I stood there for 5 seconds, listening to the whispers of the fire. I felt nothing. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel sorry. I just felt impatient. She was in the way. I stepped over her legs, careful not to trip. I didn't close her eyes. That was a gesture for people who still believed in souls. I am not cold, I thought, the realization settling over me with the weight of a tombstone. I still feel the heat. I still feel the burn. But the guilt is cooling down. It is becoming just another number. I reached the far door and cycled the airlock. I left Auron and the fire behind. I didn't look back. There was no point. The past was just data that hadn't been deleted yet. Chapter 13. The Last Vox. The communication spire was the highest point of the station, a lonely needle of plasteel thrusting up into the void. It was supposed to be a sanctuary of signals, a place where voices bridged the gap between stars. Now, it was a coffin. I found Scylla barricaded inside the main control room. She had piled heavy server racks against the door, creating a fortress of junk. She was sitting on the floor, clutching her bolt pistol, her bionic eye twitching erratically. She looked at me as I squeezed through the maintenance hatch, and for a moment the tension left her shoulders. She thought I was reinforcement. She thought I was a friend. "Lucan," she breathed, scrambling to her feet. "The long-range transmitter is still active. I've been trying to hail the patrol fleet, but the interference... The sun is screaming too loud." "Let me try," I said. I stepped past her, moving to the console. The screens were awash with static, a snowstorm of white and violet noise. I didn't care about the fleet. I cared about the upload speed. My hand went to my chest, feeling the phantom heat of the drive in my boot. I needed a high-gain antenna to push the data package out before the station died. But to use the antenna, I needed to clear the frequency. I punched in the emergency codes. I bypassed the filters. I forced the signal through the storm. "This is Helios Omega," I spoke into the microphone. "Code Black. Containment breach. Requesting immediate extraction." The static hissed. Then a voice cut through. It wasn't the warm voice of a rescuer. It was cold, clipped, and terrifyingly calm. It was the voice of the Imperial Navy. "Helios Omega. This is the sword of retribution," the voice crackled. "We read your biometric signatures. We read the corruption in the spectral bands. There will be no extraction." Scylla grabbed my arm. Tell them we're clean. Tell them we're still human. "We have survivors," I said, my voice steady. "We have data." "Negative," the Navy captain replied. "The infection is spiritual. Quarantine is impossible. Exterminatus protocols are authorized. The torpedoes have been launched. May the Emperor have mercy on your souls." The line went dead. No, it didn't go dead. It was hijacked. The speakers suddenly erupted with a sound that made Scylla drop her gun and cover her ears. It was the hum. It was the choir. And over it, the booming, distorted voice of Magos Varric, the burning saint, thundered through the room. "Mercy." Varric laughed, the sound tearing at the speaker cones. "They bring you fire to burn the body, but I bring you fire to free the spirit. Open the blast shutters. Let the torpedoes come. We shall embrace the annihilation and be born anew in the warp." The room began to shake, not from the voice, but from something pounding on the barricaded door. The sleepwalkers had found us. They were scratching at the metal, their fingernails tearing against the steel. Scylla looked at me, her face pale, her bionic eye spinning in panic. "We have to go," she stammered. "The escape pods. If the fleet won't take us, we can launch manually before the torpedoes hit. We have maybe 10 minutes. I looked at the console. The data upload was queued, but the interference from Varric's broadcast was jamming the signal. I needed to boost the gain. I needed someone to manually override the dampeners on the external dish. It was a two-man job, one to type, one to turn the valve outside. The valve was on the catwalk where the shadows were waiting. I looked at Scylla. She was the only person left who knew my name. She was the one who had given me the painkillers for Jonas. She was a survivor, tough and pragmatic. She trusted me. "The pods are locked," I lied. It was easy. The words just fell out of my mouth. The system is jammed by the dampeners. Someone has to go out to the external walkway and release the hydraulic pressure manually. If we don't do it, the pods won't launch. We'll burn here. Scylla hesitated. She looked at the door where the banging was getting louder. She looked at the console. I don't know the codes, Lucan. You have to drive the system." "Exactly," I said. "I'll prep the launch sequence. You just need to turn the valve. It's right outside the airlock. It will take 10 seconds. She looked at me. She was searching for a lie, for a flicker of hesitation. But I had no hesitation left. I had sold my hesitation to the machine downstairs. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." She holstered her pistol. She walked to the external airlock. She punched the cycle button. The inner door hissed open. She stepped into the small chamber and looked back at me one last time. 10 seconds, she said. "Then you get us out of here." 10 seconds, I repeated. I closed the inner door. I watched through the thick glass porthole as the outer door opened. The wind of the void didn't rush in. The atmosphere was gone. Scylla stepped out onto the catwalk. She didn't get to the valve. The moment she stepped into the purple light, the shadows detached from the railing. They swarmed her. It looked like a flock of birds descending on a crumb of bread. I couldn't hear her scream through the glass, but I saw her mouth open. I saw her bionic eye burst in a shower of sparks as something dark and shapeless forced its way into her skull. She didn't die instantly. She was lifted up, suspended in the violet glare, writhing as she was unmade. I turned away from the window. With the external door open, the interference dropped just enough. The signal strength bar on my console flickered from red to yellow. Uploading. I watched the progress bar. I didn't watch Scylla. She was buying me bandwidth with her life. It was a transaction. Pure economics. Upload complete. I pulled the black box from the port, though I had just sent a copy. The physical drive was the key. The backup. I shoved it back into my boot. The heat was soothing now. "Thank you, Scylla," I said to the empty room. I didn't open the airlock to check for remains. I unlocked the blast door on the other side of the room and ran. The torpedoes were coming, and I had a schedule to keep. Chapter 14. One-way ticket. The escape bay was chaos. The alarms were no longer sounding. The speakers had burned out hours ago, leaving only the structural groan of the station as it began to break apart under the gravitational stress. I sprinted toward Bay 4. The floor was buckled hot to the touch, and the air was filled with a thick, acrid smoke that tasted of burning plastic and cooked meat. I could feel the Imperial torpedoes closing in. I could feel the impact tremors in my teeth. They were cracking the station open like an egg, letting the warp spill in to finish what the sun had started. I reached the last pod. It was a standard-issue lifeboat, a claustrophobic cylinder of ceramite designed to hold 12 people. It was pristine, white, and empty. I keyed the access pad. The door hissed open, inviting me into its sterile belly. Wait, the shout came from the corridor behind me. I turned. A group of survivors stumbled out of the smoke. There were 5 of them, 2 junior engineers, a bloody security officer, and 2 children, the offspring of the station's administrative caste. They looked at me with eyes that were wide, wet, and desperate. They saw the open door. They saw the salvation I controlled. "Hold the door!" the officer screamed, limping forward, dragging one of the children by the hand. "For the Emperor's sake, hold it." I stood in the threshold. My hand hovered over the internal control panel. I looked at the children. They were terrified, soot-stained, crying, silent tears. For a microsecond, the old Lucan surfaced. The Lucan who kept a photo of his sister. the Lucan who shared his rations. I prepared to step back to wave them inside. Then the darkness arrived. The smoke at the end of the hall turned violet. A ball of plasma bright as a miniature sun roared down the corridor. It struck the security officer in the chest. There was no blood. He simply vaporized his body, turning into a cloud of red mist and ash in an instant. The children fell screaming as the heat wave rolled over them. Magos Varric stepped through the fire. He was magnificent and hideous. The burning saint towered over the survivors, his metal limbs glowing with white-hot intensity. He wasn't walking. He was floating inches above the deck, suspended by the sheer pressure of the warp energy pouring off him. His face was a crater of molten gold and flesh. "The fire does not burn," Varric chanted, raising his plasma cannon. "It loves. It holds. Why do you run from the embrace?" He fired again. One of the engineers dissolved. The survivors scrambled toward me, climbing over the smoking remains of their protector. They were 10 meters away. 5 meters. I looked at the open door. I looked at Varric. Then I looked at the black box. I didn't need to check it. I could feel it vibrating against my bone, buzzing with a frantic, aggressive energy. A message flashed across my retinal display, projected directly from the drive in my boot. It was red, blocky text that obscured the weeping faces of the children. Objective preserved data. Probability of survival with additional mass, 12%. Probability of survival alone, 98%. Survive. The word pulsed in my vision. Survive. I remembered Jonas. I remembered how I tried to help him and how he had turned into a monster. I remembered Aurene and how my hesitation had only prolonged her pain. Kindness was a variable that led to error. Empathy was a glitch. The children reached the ramp. The girl reached out her hand, her fingers brushing the hem of my tunic. "Please," she sobbed. "I'm sorry," I said. But I wasn't speaking to her. I was speaking to the ghost of the man I used to be. I kicked her hand away. It wasn't a violent kick, just a firm shove enough to knock her back down the ramp.